Where are you? Which
I'm
country?
from Holland.
Holland.
Yes.
Great.
And unfortunately, I couldn't watch your interview.
That's okay. That's quite okay. You'll have the...
Well,
yes.
someone told me it was
tonight.
very beautiful, so
Okay.
I'm glad to be here.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where are you based? Where are you speaking from now?
I'm speaking from the outskirts of Geneva, Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
That's where I live.
Oh, I see. I thought you lived in the UK.
No, I was raised as a child in the UK. Manuela, hello.
Hello.
How do you appear suddenly on this thing?
Well, because I joined in, but I can't see the screen.
Okay.
Let's see if it works now.
Marek, I guess you give the departure.
I will, yeah. Okay. All right, I have it 7 o'clock here. So let's get going.
Okay.
We have here Pierre Pradevant, the author of The Gentle Art of Blessing, and an expert on the spiritual practice of blessing. Before we get started, just a few things. This live event is going to be recorded, so if you don't want to have your face shown, you can turn off your camera in the lower left corner. And another thing, questions. Please ask questions. We're with a small group right now, so you can either just physically raise your hand or type a question in the chat. Also in the lower bar. Let me see. Pierre, we actually have an official Awaken to Love song.
Wonderful.
Do you want to hear it?
I'd love to.
All right. Give me a second.
You free, so you can see. You awaken to love. You can hear what I'm singing. You'll see starlight from above. You can make the future shine. Don't let your preconceptions cloud your thinking. Love is showing you a better way. Hear the truth and you will start believing. It happens when you awaken to love. All the memories of your past, all the pain, it will be healed. All the love. Stop looking out, take a look inside. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Turn on the light, come alive. Love sets you free, so you can see. It happens when you awaken to love. All the thoughts that plague your mind, you can leave them all behind. You can live for today. You can find a better way. Don't let your independence isolate you. Love can move us forward hand in hand. The universe's power is for sharing. It happens when you awaken to love. Don't let yourself be fooled by all the screaming, while the sleeping masses cling on to their truth. The power of the future now awaits us. Be part of leading all the world to love. Be part of leading all the world to love. Be part of bringing all the world to love. Be a part of leading all the world to love. Part of leading all the world to love.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Marek, just a
Yes.
minute ago, you presented me as a specialist in blessing.
Yes.
Well, I prefer saying I'm a humble student of blessing. I've been practicing it for 30 years and I'm constantly learning. This year, I've completely changed my way of blessing people in the street and public transport. So we'll speak about that later, but I really am no expert. I don't know if anybody can be an expert in blessing. We are all learners on this incredible, incredible road to enlightenment and infinite love. So I just wanted to make that, because the word expert, terrifies some people.
Yeah. Well, the Zoom room is yours, Pierre.
Thank you. Okay, maybe I would like to share how I discovered this precious practice just over 30 years ago. I was working for a group of NGOs in Switzerland. And by the way, I should say that I've worked many years in Africa. I've worked in many different areas. I have had many activities: sociologist, program director, international consultant, journalist, and now I run my own workshops. I write quite a lot. I've published about 15 books in 13 languages, and do coaching. And so I'm privileged to have a very rich and beautiful life with the most wonderful partner on the planet. And so I was working this group of NGOs. I'd just come back from Africa, and I was setting up a new program for schools. This was in the early 80s, on North-South issues. At that time, one hardly spoke about Third World in Swiss schools. And I was totally devoted to my job. I was so attached that I even had a camp bed at the office. And when I missed the last train home, I would sleep at the office. And there was, however, one guy in these 4 organizations who just hated my guts. I don't know for what reason. I think because he discerned a slight spiritual aspect to me, and he was a militant atheist. Well, in any case, that's not important, but he managed to convince his 3 colleagues that I had to go. And I joined a world campaign called the Hunger Project in '84. This is a project which started in the US and went all over the world with the aim of ending hunger by the year 2000. And I spoke about this program with enthusiasm in my work in the schools. And these 4 organizations, maybe because they were slightly leftist and didn't seem to like what came from the USA, they forbid me to speak about this world campaign. Now, these are organizations that are financing programs in Africa and the rest of the world to fight hunger, and they're forbidding me to speak about this world campaign. I thought that completely insane, but they were my bosses. And however, I continued using the slogan, the end of hunger by the year 2000, which was the slogan of this campaign, because I'd worked in Africa 11 years. I was one of the co-founders of the largest network of peasant, grassroots peasant organizations on the whole continent. And I was very close to one peasant organization in Senegal, which has as a slogan, the end of hunger by the year 2000. As a matter of fact, it was called Committee to Fight for the End of Hunger. And so I continued using the slogan because my African friends at the grassroots used it and they knew what hunger was. They experienced it. And one day I was convened to a meeting, a business meeting. No minutes were taken whatsoever. It was completely illegal. And I was told, either you stop saying we can end hunger by the year 2000 because this world campaign says it, or you quit your job. I nearly fell off my chair. Here were 4 organizations fighting hunger, telling me that I should stop speaking about the end of hunger. And of course, it was just a plot to get rid of me. They discussed together and they said, you know, if we know Pierre, we know his integrity. If we put him in front of this alternative, he'll quit his job, which of course I did. I didn't want to commit a moral harakiri. And I developed in the following weeks and months, Marek, the most incredible resentment against these people. I mean, it was eating me up from morning to night. As soon as I woke in the morning, I was thinking about that under the shower, going to the post office, preparing dinner. It was literally what psychologists called an obsession. And I was praying, doing all sorts of spiritual texts, meditating, repeating mantras, nothing happened. And I was desperate because I knew I was harming myself. And then suddenly one day, reading the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' statement, bless those who curse you. And I saw, but of course, Pierre, it's so simple. You just have to bless them. So I started blessing the people concerned. First, it was in the mind, because I was obeying what I thought was a revealed commandment of great value. But soon it went down to the heart, because blessing is 100% heart energy. I insist on that. A blessing that is just in the mind has no power to heal. It can only heal when it comes from the deepest compassion, the deepest love in the heart. And so I continued doing this the whole day long. Suddenly, 3 months later, I started blessing people in the street, the supermarket, the post office, and public transport. It became so joyful. I used to travel quite a lot by train. I used to walk the whole length of the train, both ways, to be sure to bless every single person on that train. And I started having some amazing experiences with blessing. I remember this school. It was a college where I was with a friend, an African friend. He had an Afro-Caribbean orchestra with singers and musicians, and he'd offered to organize a benefit concert for this peasant farmer organization in Senegal, which had the slogan, "The End of Hunger by the Year 2000." And the concierge, the technician of the college, didn't want to have anything to do with our concert. It was in the evening after working out, and the director of the college told me, "Look, Pierre, I'm sorry, but he's a functionary, civil servant. I can't force him to work after working hours. You have to pay somebody from another college," which we did. And the concert had been announced on the radio, in the media. And 2 hours before the concert, I get there with my Cameroonian friend, and there were only 2 mics left on the scene. And my friend said, "Look, Pierre, I can't have an orchestra with 12 singers and musicians and 2 mics." So we went to see the technician of the concierge of the college, who was so hostile. And we started talking to him, trying to understand why there were only 2 mics left. And I felt anger welling up in my plexus. And my little voice said, "Pierre, you will not solve this problem by getting angry. Bless him." And he was talking to my friend. And I just started blessing him in his peace, in his compassion, his kindness, every conceivable manner. In between 2 sentences, Merrick, his face changed completely, a big smile on his face. He went to his laboratory, came back with a pile of mics, suggested the best ones, and wished us the most wonderful evening. So blessing works. I've been receiving feedback from the whole field for 30 years now, people saying this works. And then some months later, I'd been asked to give a talk in Zurich on the theme, Blessing the World. It was an international youth meeting, and I was to address this theme. And while I was writing my speech, suddenly I received a gust of information, of inspiration. Some people speak about automatic writing. I would prefer saying I was just inspired by the Spirit. And I started writing. My hand could hardly follow the inspiration that was pouring in. And this 1-page text, "The Gentle Art of Blessing," was the result. And I started sharing it in letters with people. I had at the time quite a large worldwide network of correspondents, and others like Dr. Jerry Jampolsky, a leading psychiatrist in the States, who had a major world network, started sharing it too. And I started receiving responses and letters from people saying, "It works, it works, it works." And it's been working for 30 years. I now have a website that was organized by 2 friends of mine, one of whom is looking at this session with us. And there's a whole section on healings via blessing. And there are many, many of them. But I'd like to say, if people want to interrupt me at any time with a question, please go ahead. I always say that for me, a talk is an excuse to reply to people's questions. That's my real interest. I don't want to speak nonstop for an hour or so. That would be terrible. So please go ahead and ask any questions you feel like. Okay. Well, if there are no questions for the moment, should I continue?
I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, I'm on mute. Thank you, Mark. I understand that you have to do it by heart, or otherwise it won't help, I think. But
you bless from the heart.
Yes, but do you also say words in your head, or?
Well, usually, as the text on blessing, General Blessing explains, you always bless people in the contrary of what the material problem appears to be. For instance, if I said, see a drunkard yelling out in the bus or on the street, I bless him in his mastery, in his serenity. If I see someone who's deeply depressed in a tram or whatever the bus, I bless them in their joy, in their serenity, in their wisdom, in their strength. The opposite of what the situation appears to be. And after 30 years, I don't always have to say words. There's just this elan, this energy of the heart that goes to the others. But in the recent year, in the past year, I've started doing blessing in a different manner. And that's a wonderful thing with this practice. You continually reinvent it. If you continue just repeating the same formulas, it becomes completely stale. Any spiritual practice that becomes mechanical is dead. It really has to be alive. And what I've started doing in the past year, when I bless someone, I first say, I love you. And then, for instance, I bless you in your divinity or whatever. But this has changed things so fundamentally for me. And it's one of the greatest spiritual challenges I've ever put myself in front, to look at every single person and say with feeling from the heart, of course I don't say it out loud, just inside myself, I love you and bless you in your divine perfection, for instance. That's my favorite blessing at the moment. And this is very challenging because it makes me realize how many unconscious barriers we have due to our conditioning in a society. You know, we judge people's faces so rapidly or almost instantly, or their gait or their whatever, their dress. And this teaches us to go beyond any physical appearance and just accept them as a child of God they are. But to say the expression mentally in my heart, not out loud, of course, I love you, is very demanding and beautiful, because it will make me, I hope, progress a little bit. I'd like to say that I'm in the first grade of the spiritual life. I've just passed from kindergarten to the first grade. There's such a lot to learn, and that's the wonder of it. Does that reply to your question? Or do you have something else?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I was trying to unmute myself, but Marek as well. No, that answers the question. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I think I'd like to read a couple of blessings. I've just published this book in June. 365 blessings to heal myself and the world. And they cover every single situation you can imagine. And many people read one in the morning before leaving home as a sort of morning spiritual meditation. So let me read one on a topic that touches me very, very deeply. A blessing for child soldiers. Child soldiers are defined as any children under the age of 18 who are recruited by a state or non-state armed group and used as fighters, cooks, suicide bombers, human shields, messengers, spies, or for sexual purposes, of course, especially the girl. In the last 15 years, the use of child soldiers has spread to almost every region of the world. That's not the blessing. That's every blessing in this book is preceded by a small text to explain the context of the blessing. Now here's the blessing. From our heart of hearts, we bless children who are abducted and forced to serve in armed conflict. We bless them in their innocence, that despite the trying and sometimes dramatic situations they are in, deep down inside them, the consciousness of this innocence stays awake. We bless them in their fundamental integrity, that the horrendous things they are forced to witness and often to accomplish may not erase their desire to escape from the human hell they have been forced into, or their belief in another more humane and normal life and the possibility of one day achieving it. We bless them in their consciousness of their oneness with you and of their essentially perfect divine identity. When they walk through Death Canyon, may your hand keep them safe from all evil, both from performing it or being its victim. When solitude, hunger, sheer despair, or the desire to give up on life cruelly grips them, may the comforting presence of grace support them and lift them up. And finally, we bless the adults who so uncaringly force children who could be their own into such situations, that your spirit may awaken them to their true nature as children of God. Okay, let me, there are 365, so the choice is rather difficult for me tonight. But let me touch on a theme that is more and more acute in Western countries, is people committing suicide. In Switzerland, the recent statistics just said that among the, I think, 14 to 18-year-olds, suicide is the first cause of death. Now that's stunning. One of the very richest countries in the world, with an excellent health system, excellent public schools, where most people live very comfortably. And yet, so many kids commit suicide. There must be something rather wrong in a society where this happens like that. So let me reach this. One thing very important that I say in the introduction, and this is one of the great understandings I've reached in the recent 2-3 years. Each one in life is at their highest level of consciousness at every single moment. Truly understanding this makes judging our neighbor practically impossible. And this is particularly true of people taking their lives or considering to take their lives. Our hearts must go out to them with the most immense compassion and tenderness, which is what we will do now. And so now the blessing starts. We extend our love and burning compassion to the thousands all around the planet who are considering at this very moment, as I speak, taking their own life. I'll make a pause, and let us all who are on this program bless all those considering suicide. Bless them in their hope, and above all, their deep self-love. This is one of the most needed things on the planet. I've been for years giving a workshop on learning to love yourself. The only person who doesn't love themselves can consider suicide. I continue. We bless them from the depths of our soul, that they may be by some miracle, which is the normal functioning of grace, be touched by some event, experience, feeling, which puts an end to their somber plans or halts their unpremeditated, self-destructive impulse. May the magic of grace break through all the darkness in their heart, that they may somehow feel the unconditional caring of the source for their good and their wholeness, yea, even their deep happiness. Despite all the self-loathing and self-condemnation, or simply their utter and total despair, may they feel that infinite love has already forgiven in advance anything and everything they could ever do. We bless them that they may understand that the lessons they might be avoiding here on earth will have to be learned in another realm or another incarnation, and that these lessons are solely for their good, however tough they seem to be, and some are admittedly horrendously challenging. We bless those that surround them, that they may find just the right words to turn them around and evoke in them that glimmer of hope that makes all the difference. And if they have made a failed attempt to take their own life, may they be received not with condemnation or a frown, but with open arms and hearts and loving faces and words that evoke in them the desire to live a full and useful life. Was there a question on the screen? I don't know. Okay. So I'd like to stress that blessing really applies to every single situation. I cannot imagine a situation where one cannot bless. And I'm going to maybe shock one or two people, but I have in my book a blessing on making love. And I'd like to read it because I think it's important to understand that everything, every single situation can be blessed. So here's a blessing for making love. May our lovemaking be a perfect expression of your love for us, an experience of ecstatic beauty and profound depth. May we put our partner's pleasure before our own and be most sensitive to their most subtle wish and hidden desire. May our bodies become instruments playing music for your glory, and our hearts be filled with the music of soul. May we, in the rush of busy lives, find refreshment for our souls, a sigh of peaceful rest for our bodies, and a special moment of green pastures for our deeper being. May it cement our togetherness in the unique way true lovemaking restores both body and soul, while at the same time being a gentle playground for the child in us. And above all, may it strengthen our commitment of faithfulness to each other in the understanding that we are both each other's keeper, and the keepers of our spoken and unspoken vow. Blessing is not only for tough, difficult situations. Blessing can be something so joyful. And if one compares, takes a Bach cantate, it has a basic melody, which is the cantus firmus, and the counterpoint develops infinitely if the cantus firmus is strong, which it always is in Bach's cantates. And I see this cantus firmus is as our spiritual life, and blessing as a counterpoint for us to play and use all day long. I'm still very far from blessing all day long. That's why I insist that I'm in first grade primary school in terms of blessing. But the little bit I've learned is just so fabulous that it changes everything. Let me explain, give you an example that happened quite recently. I mentioned a moment ago that understanding that everyone is at their highest level of consciousness in every situation. And that includes President Trump and President Assad of Syria and the new President Bolsonaro of Brazil and so many others. Really, blessing changes their burden, understanding that everyone is at their highest level of consciousness ultimately makes judgment quite impossible. Joel Goldsmith, that fabulous American mystic of the last century, once said, "No one can enter my consciousness who needs to be forgiven, because I have already forgiven him 70 times 7. And I think I can say I've reached that understanding, and it is so wonderful because it's so restful to not judge people, including the worst murderer. I've worked 18 years as a volunteer in the local Geneva prison, and I've met murderers and rapists and everything one meets during such a long period visiting people. And I can really say, I see that every single one that I met, every single one was at his highest level of consciousness. So let me share this experience. I was working at my desk some time ago, and all of a sudden I receive a phone call. And I take the phone, and someone says in English with a very strong Indian accent, "This is the Apple Windows office in London, and we are phoning you because you have major problems with the functioning of your computer." Now, I must make a parenthesis and explain that I'm a Paleolithic caveman in terms of my understanding of computers and internet and all that stuff. And suddenly I see his mouse moving around my screen. Afterwards, my webmaster told me, "Pierre, somehow you gave him access to your screen, but everything went so fast, I didn't even realize I was giving him access to my screen." And he started talking and saying, "I have to move this, I have to efface this, rub this off," and all sorts of technical jargon. And after there's a question, Marek, do you take the questions down?
Yeah, there's a question, but go ahead, finish
my story. And I started feeling very uneasy, and suddenly, after 20-25 minutes, he said, "Okay, now I've done what's needed. It'll be $150. And I said, but we never mentioned anything about payment. I thought this was a sort of official call from the Apple Windows office in London. No, you know that everything is paid nowadays. If you have a bank card, you can pay me with your card. And the noodle I was, I mean, it was just such a noodle. I paid him immediately. And then I jumped on my phone and called my webmaster, who knows, thank God, a little more than I do about computers. And he said, Pierre, you've just been hooked. You've just been tricked in the most classical manner. Pull out your internet contact immediately. Cancel your bank card immediately. And you'll have to come to my home. He lives in another part of Switzerland. Then I have to change your whole system. And so the whole thing cost me, I guess, close to $500. And I'm not the type of guy who has $500 to throw around. The very second, not the very minute, the very second I realized I'd been tricked, I started blessing this man. I blessed him in his integrity, I blessed him in his peace, and I felt such compassion for him. Because imagine, my webmaster told me that in New Delhi and Bombay, they have huge offices with dozens of people doing this all day long. He will never be able to be happy, this man. He spends his whole life cheating people, tricking people all around the planet. And I kept up these blessings for weeks. I continued blessing him. So it's a wonderful tool to heal any resentment or negative feeling about anything. Now, can we get to the questions, Sandyal?
Yeah. Monique had a question as well. You're unmuted, Monique.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Hi, Pierre. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for this beautiful talk. I have a question. You said something about that blessings, there are no situations that are...
that you can't bless, that you can't bless.
Yeah, that you can't bless. You have written another book a long time ago about Roger McGowan.
Yes.
I have read that book and I really would love for you to tell something about that because it's one of the most inspiring books I've ever read in my life.
Okay, I will with great joy.
Oh, great.
Roger is a man who is on death row, Texas for 25 years for a crime we know absolutely, we even have scientific proof that he did not commit. And I heard about him in 1996 and started corresponding with him in 1997. And after 2-3 years, these letters were so amazing. I thought, I can't keep these letters to myself. They belong to the cultural heritage of humanity. And I'm fortunate to have the most amazing publisher. One can imagine the French publisher, Éditions Jouvence, in fact, it's a Swiss publisher, who specializes in sort of new age books, good health, eating, good eating, anything to do with better living. So Death Row, Texas was about 100 miles away from anything they'd ever published, but he took the risk because he believed in the book. And his book ultimately, finally, probably saved Roger's life. And this man has been he entered death row in 87 in a state of total revolt, hate, anger. One understands, after all, he had a lawyer who was a known alcoholic who fell asleep during his trial. The whole courtroom could hear him snore, and he didn't even visit his client before the trial, and didn't make one phone call to verify Roger's alibi. I mean, it was, alas, typical Texan justice. if you are poor and black, there are few chances that you have a decent trial. And so he entered, and then little by little, by his own efforts, he started becoming self-taught in spirituality. And some of his correspondents, he had a few correspondents, sent him books, and he started really climbing the ladder of spirituality. And he's now become he has a website, by the way, helproger.com. The title of the website is awful, it's going to be changed. helproger.com for anyone interested. And I published a book also in English on him called Messages of Life from Death Row. And this man has said, when he was on death row, he wrote to a friend of mine saying, if I have to die on death row, I will have at least shown that one can be happy there. Can you imagine, when you know that death row, Texas, is the end of hell, with tiny cells, 6 by 9 foot cells, which are practically blind because there's a tiny, tiny window right at the top against the ceiling, so he never sees outside. Great violence and constant noise. You can't sleep more than half an hour before being woken up. And it's really sheer hell. Prisoners are in total isolation. They can't touch each other ever. And so it's really hell. And he's done such a spiritual path. And at one moment, he was going through desperate situation on death row. I mean, with guards who were very tough. And I sent him my book, Gentle Art of Blessing, chapter by chapter. And at that moment, I can really say it turned his life around. And there are beautiful passages in his book where he explains how blessing completely changed his situation. And he said, the guards have changed their behavior towards me, but it's not because of something in them, it's because I bless them constantly. And this man has become a powerhouse, a lighthouse for hundreds, and certainly he is one of my main spiritual teachers. Roger McGowan has never gone beyond ghetto primary school, and believe me, ghetto primary school isn't the best education you can get, and has become a spiritual giant and is helping people all around the world. So, and that's, for me, the proof. If it can work on death row, Texas, it can work anywhere, but also in the poorest villages of Sahel. I have a very dear friend in Mali. Mali is one of the Western countries of Africa, West Africa, north of Ghana. And I have a very dear friend who's a devout Muslim, but very broad-minded Muslim, Mamadou Kassambara. And he's a secondary school teacher, but he founded an NGO to help the poorest of the poor in the world, the rural women of the poor women of rural Mali. And he's become the most passionate devotee of the practice of blessing. I mean, he's become a teacher for me. And he's so integrated blessing into his life. And I've just published a new book on blessing in French. And I dedicated the book to him because he's such an amazing practitioner. When he discovered the blessing, he told me, oh, I've created 100 blessing circles in villages. The blessing circle was, he taught them, when you have a problem, instead of pestering about it, just gather and you start blessing the situation. And he did that in some of the poorest villages on the planet. And it touches me deeply because it shows that anyone and everyone, Monica, can practice blessing. And of course, the person who blesses is the main beneficiary of blessing. It brings ultimately a state of constant peace, quiet joy, and especially a constant link to your neighbor. And I'd like to stress that on the blessing website, the address of the blessing website is gentleartofblessing.org, all linked, gentleartofblessing.org. And I write every month I write a blog, and I wrote one recently which struck quite a few people about loving Donald Trump. When President Trump when he announced his candidacy for the presidential race 2 years ago, I started blessing this man immediately. I knew very little about him, but I started blessing him. And I've continued non-stop since he's president. And as a matter of fact, every morning I bless 5 major actors of the political scene. Vladimir Putin, as a matter of fact, that's the toughest for me. President Trump, President Assad of Syria, President Kim of North Korea, and just recently, President Bolsonaro of Brazil, who's just dismantled or is dismantling the Ministry of Environment and has said that he's going to open up Amazon to deforesting as much as people want. And he doesn't seem the friendliest person for the environment and many others. And these people, because they are in positions of such power, are so often surrounded by, I'd say, walls of cement, the hate, the cement of hate. And they need a few people to send some thoughts of love and blessing to pierce these walls of cement, that they may receive some better energies than the hate so many people are throwing at them. There we are. Are there any other questions, Marek? Oh, yes.
Did you raise your hand, Sylvia?
No. I saw Monique waving and I thought, hi, Monique.
I just saw a comment from Brazil, just a minute, on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, there's another question from Andy.
That's right.
Do you think words are needed, whether spoken or silent, or can feelings be blessings?
Andy, thank you for that question. Absolutely, you're so dot on. Of course, it's the feeling that heals. Mary Baker Eddy, who was a great luminary of the 19th century in the States, she said, a deep sincerity is sure of success, for God takes care of it. And for me, this applies so well to blessing. What counts, Andy, is the sincerity. It's not the words. You know that the Heart Math Institute in California, from most of the people in the States have heard about it. It's a remarkable institute that for many years has been doing research on the function of the heart. And they discovered that the heart energy is 5,000 times more powerful than the energy of the brain. Now that's something. And that's why blessing from the heart heals. And it's important to bless with feeling. Unless you feel the words you say, blessing doesn't heal. And Joel Goldsmith does exactly the same thing. He was an incredible healer, this man. He used to, at one time of his life, he received over 130 phone calls per day on average, all asking for healing. And most of them were healed, some of them instantaneously. And he so insists. I was, like many in the West, brought up in a very traditional Christian church. As a matter of fact, my father was a pastor. And it was all in the mind. These long sermons on Sunday, just a string of ideas in the intellect, in the mind, but there was no heart. So I discovered the heart when I started going to Quaker meetings. And now in our little blessing circle, I've created a little blessing circle in Geneva. We're just a small group, but there's such love. And that's the most important thing. So right on, Andy. You don't need to say words. Just feeling love for someone is a tremendous blessing. And we know now that everything is energy in our universe, and the energy of blessing doesn't need words. To begin with, for a beginner, it's helpful to have words, and that's why I publish a book on 365 blessings, which seems to help people very much. But the essential is the feeling, the heart of the whole thing. Is somebody called Rejan asking a question or making a comment?
Jean G?
Jean.
Yeah.
Rejan?
Jean. It's just Jean.
Ah, Jean.
And you and I have exchanged emails here from New Jersey in the USA. And you quoted Mary Baker Eddy, who says, to love me and mine and all. And I get the me. I feel such personal blessing with blessings. And when it's like one-on-one, I feel that the other person is benefited. I can see it one-on-one or one-on-two in little blessing groups. But it's so hard to keep up the momentum with so much going on in the world to really bless the big groups, like you said, those, suicide or rapists or murderers or politicians or, even just those struggling in a marriage or whatever. How do you keep up the momentum and the joy and trust that your blessing is having an impact?
Jean, I will share with you my favorite little prayer, which I made up 15 years ago, which is the very basis of my spiritual life. I would say it summarizes the totality of what I wish to reach one day on my spiritual path. I'll repeat it slowly twice so you can write it down if you want to. Shine as me. And may I be so thee with a capital T. May I be so thee that all those I encounter may experience me as thy radiant presence, thy unconditional love and forgiveness. May they no longer see me, but only thee.
I love that.
Now, it just brings up the most powerful spiritual experience I had in my life, where the ego disappeared completely and totally. I was on a trip to Africa. I was one of the co-founders of what was in the 70s the largest peasant farmer organization in the whole of Africa. Small peasant farmers, not large farmers. There are not many of them, except in South Africa and Kenya. But on the last day of our meeting in a small city of Burkina Faso called Ouahigouya, I caught dysentery. Now, at the beginning, dysentery isn't serious, but it's a a real nuisance. You have to run the whole time to the toilet. And at the time, I was using a method of pure spiritual healing. I wasn't using medicine at all, and it worked pretty well for 35 years in my life. And so I worked the whole afternoon with my mantras, my spiritual texts, my meditations, and all the stuff I usually did. And it seemed to have disappeared. And I went out in the evening for dinner with a very dear African friend. And the next day I had to go back home. I went to the airport, and on the trip to the airport, it starts all over again. And on the plane, I was with my little texts, my mantras, my affirmations, my prayers, listening, all the stuff I did usually. And I was sitting next to an unaccompanied young boy with his little, his little sort of thing on the chest with his name, his parents' phone and address, etc. And the stewardess taking care of him was so loving. I've never seen that in 50 years of flying. What do I say? 70 years of flying. I've never seen such kindness expressed by a stewardess. It's as if she were his mother. She was constantly checking if he was okay. And at one moment, she speaks to him with special kindness. And suddenly, I can't say it otherwise, I felt a cosmic gratitude. There was nothing left, my thought, for gratitude. And it was projected out of the airplane. I was no longer in the plane. I was no longer in time. I was only in a space where there was infinite love. That was the only cause, the only effect, the only presence, the only power, the only reality, the only vision. There was absolutely nothing else but love. And the most wonderful thing, Pierre had disappeared completely. The mental level had vanished completely. All was on the level of feeling. And the feeling was the most tremendous, immense, incredible love, which I've come to believe is the foundation of the universe. And I was just basking in that love. And I can say that for a short time, I don't know if it was 2 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I was out of time. The divine consciousness was my consciousness. Awesome is too weak a word. There are no words to describe it, because it was beyond all human words. And suddenly, I was back in the plane. I felt something move in my entrails, in my stomach. In a matter of seconds, the dysentery disappeared. But the real healing was my vision of reality. And that is the foundation of my very modest understanding of life and why I'm here on earth. I believe my only reason on earth is to be a transparency, to love, as my little prayer tries to express. Is that okay, Jean?
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, Pierre. I got a question for you.
Yes, my dear.
Hi. So you're talking about this divine, what did you say? The consciousness?
Yes.
When you bless people, do you do that from that place or only from the personal heart?
Pardon? Do I bless?
When you bless people?
Yes.
Do you do that from the place of this divine consciousness, or do you do it from the place of the personal heart?
That's a very good question.
Because I will tell you why I ask this question. Because all that you do is so loving and so wonderful to bring this into the world. But I also realize if I bless from my person, let's for example, I don't know, get an example that I have a quarrel with my neighbor.
Yes.
And I'm blessing her because I don't like her because she's quarreling with me.
Yes.
For example, then the thing is, if I do that from the personal point of view, I want to erase the thing I see in her. Does it make any sense?
Look, you are always at your highest level of consciousness. Bless from where you are, wherever that may be. I'm not constantly in divine consciousness. My God, if I'm 1/10,000th of the time really in divine consciousness, like I was on the plane, I wouldn't even be speaking to you.
Yeah.
Okay? We are here to live out a certain experience. Like you, I'm just learning lessons every day.
Yeah. That is beautiful that you say that you're always in the highest consciousness that you are at that moment.
But everyone is.
Yeah.
President Trump and President Putin also.
Yeah, it's true. Thanks for that. That's really, my English is not so good, but it's really the, I don't know the word for it. It's really good. Yeah.
I have a great belief in the power of grace.
Mm.
Grace, and that's something that I receive every day, a message on internet from a fellow called Sandy Wilder. Sandy Wilder is the founder of a fascinating institute in Illinois called the Unlearning Institute. And I took a course with him 4 years, a workshop with him 4 years ago, and it was the best workshop I've ever had in my lifetime. And I'm an adult trainer myself. I've been running workshops for 26 years. And he sends these little messages. You can get them on internet. It's the web address is, let me see, Blessings Abound at Educare, EDUCARE, unlearning.com. Educare, that's the Latin for educate, educareunlearning.com. Blessings Abound at educareunlearning.com. And he gives great importance to the power of grace in our life. Let me give you another example. When I discovered just the art of blessing, it became something that was so joyful.
Yeah.
Yes?
Could you share the why wait?
Why wait?
Yeah.
Ah, yes. Can I just finish my story?
Sure.
And then I used to bless, I was learning what to bless, how to bless. And my wife and I, we had at our home this peasant leader from South Senegal who'd created this organization to end hunger. Okay, I told you about this a little while ago. And I was accompanying him back to the station. And we crossed a fellow I'd crossed 2 weeks ago in the street, and almost at the same place. And I have never in my life, seen such an empty, sad, desperate eyes as this man had. And as I crossed him, I thought, oh, this poor fellow, he must be completely drugged. As we passed, he punched me so violently on the nose. I fell down on the pavement. My friends, two suitcases I was carrying sprawled on the ground and started bleeding profusely. And of course, he ran away. And I jumped up and immediately said to Bedemba, my friend, bless him, bless him, bless him. And we continued to the station. We had a train to take. And by the time we arrived at the station, about 2-3 minutes later, the bleeding had completely stopped. I returned home I washed myself. I didn't even look at my face, although I felt a huge bump on my face. And when Ellie, my wonderful, fabulous wife, came home in the evening, my face was completely okay. She didn't notice anything. So, you know, you don't think in a moment like that, am I blessing from divine consciousness or what? Just listen to your heart, my friend. Listen to your heart and do what your heart tells you. Roger's grandmother, Roger McGowan, this inmate friend, he always says that one of those critical informations he received when he was in a desperate situation in prison, he remembered he prayed to God to give him something to help him. And the sentence came from his grandmother many years ago. Roger, always listen to your heart. Follow what your heart says. If you don't follow your heart, then you're going astray. And the next day, he received my text on blessing. I see there's a Mr. Hans on the screen. Oh, yes, but I must first read this text that was requested by Marek, and then I'll reply to you afterwards, Hans. It's one of these wonderful texts by Sandy Wilder of January the 7th, 2016. Why wait? What if there was an infinite plan that you could never fully understand for your life and all life forever? And what if it always has been, is now, and ever will be in operation? What if this sacred design was so multidimensional that it existed undisturbed, while each of us still had free will? This means that no matter what your choices, you are still going to arrive at the full realization of your oneness with the divine, because the plan is waking you up to what already exists. This means that you can take a faster track to enlightenment if you make certain choices than if you make others. And this track involves less suffering and more blessings. Phew, I find this text so comforting. We cannot go wrong. Sooner or later, we will all get there. I had a wonderful friend, she passed on, called Anne Napier. She was the editor of the British literary magazine Cygnus, for which I wrote many articles in the 80s and 90s. And she has a sentence that's always on my desk that as a matter of fact, I was reading this a moment ago to a friend. Seen from the eternal heart of the universe, all your choices are right choices. All your falterings are advantages, and you never did anything wrong. Wow, you never did anything wrong. I was raised in a Calvinist church where every Sunday we were told we were poor, helpless sinners. I prefer this vision of our total innocence. Okay, there was a question by Hans.
There was a question from Kenneth first.
Kenneth, yes.
Wouldn't you say blessing is a subcategory of prayer, with curse being its opposite, but using the same conduits, of course, based on the fact minds are connected?
Well, to be quite honest, I've stopped trying to define things. Defining is all on the level of the head, of the brain. And it's a level, our minds are wonderful, useful instruments for solving practical problems. But I don't believe they are so helpful for the major questions in life. And so for me, the most important, I don't believe blessing is a form of prayer, because my definition of prayer is, I've learned such a lot from Joel Goldsmith. Prayer is listening to God. We can't ask an omniscient mind anything it doesn't know. Jesus said, your Father knows what you need before you even ask him. So how on earth am I going to inform an omniscient mind of what I need? What I need to do is listen to what this infinite, incredible love is telling me. For me, the most powerful statement I have read in the world spiritual religion, literature of any religion whatsoever, any religion, is the statement at the end of the parable of the prodigal son. My son, thou art always with me. No, my child, the original translation, the Aramean is, my child, you are always with me, and all that I have is thine. That statement is so incredible. It is telling us we have everything. We are already totally divine. And so all we have to do in prayer for me is listen to what we already have. We can't ask for anything. We have it all. We simply have to awaken to the fact that we have it.
Yes, thank you. I do recognize that's a part of my personality where I'm looking for the mechanism of how things work, Yes. And I believe that every thought we put out into the ethers sticks, it's affects everybody. And that's only because of the way we were created as one, And I really think that thoughts are things like a substance, an element, that has an effect, and so it just seems so similar to me. When I say prayer, I mean, not praying for things. Recognize that's kind of a futile thing, and often is ego generated, of course. But, praying for somebody else and blessing is almost using the same machinery or whatever, because there is a physiology behind it, a metaphysics, I've always been curious about that. I can't help myself, so I apologize.
No, that's okay. I'd like to say that Byron Katie, the great specialist of personal development, is one of the persons I admire most on the planet. I've taken a workshop with her, and she's one of the rare people right at the top there who has practically no ego. And she says that the number one problem of the world is not hunger or political conflict or wars or whatever, it is confusion. And I agree with her. But she also says that my favorite reply to any question is, I don't know. And I am every day more aware of my incredible ignorance of almost everything, just how a tree functions, really, and so many other things. And the only thing I'm really, really, really clear about is that I'm here to learn, to love, and to share love, and to get rid of this little thing called the ego. I think that's the main reason we are here on earth, learning to transcend the ego. That's my little explanation. Mm. And, I have a doctorate in sociology, and 15 years ago, I threw away the last copy of my doctorate because I found it so funny that I could have spent 2 years writing a dissertation with 800 pages, 900 references. I was so proud of it at that time. And today I just have to laugh. And so I am moving more and more towards functioning from the heart. Now I'm privileged to have a mind that seems to function fairly well. And I try to use it in an intelligent manner. But the heart energy, as the Heart Math Institute in California says, is 5,000 times more powerful than the brain energy. And that's why blessing from the heart is so powerful. Let me tell you one of my favorite blessings on the blessing website, gentleartofblessing.org. There's a whole section on blessing, and one is there's a whole section on healing through blessing. And my favorite healing is of a gentleman who was head of a large supermarket chain in German-speaking Switzerland. I think it was Zurich. And he had a terrible depression. He had to go to a clinic. They pumped all sorts of drugs into him. And after months of this intense medical treatment, it seemed he was better. And he went back to work. And after a few weeks, he felt he was slipping back into depression. And he panicked and he rushed off to his psychiatrist, and who said, "Mr. Ullman, I refuse to give you any drugs." Can you imagine that? Today, the psychiatrist telling the client, "I refuse to give you any drugs. Here is what I prescribe to you." And he handed him my book on the gentle art of blessing and Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. And this guy went home and started blessing, blessing, blessing. And it totally lifted him out of depression. And he said, "Believe me, as the head of a supermarket, large supermarket, I have numerous opportunities to bless all day long." I love that story. Okay, there were some more questions, Marek.
Were there more questions?
No, I thought I saw a name or something. No, okay.
Could you talk briefly about the Benevolent Universe?
Yes, I really believe, in part only, because of my experience on the plane I talked about, that we live in an incredibly loving, benevolent universe. And this universe, everything in this universe is there to help us on our trip, on our path to enlightenment and unconditional love, which is the aim of our life here on earth, learning to express unconditional love, because I think there is nothing, in my modest understanding, there's nothing more tremendous in life, no greater power, unconditional love. And I also believe that nothing happens by chance, that every single thing is planned, as this beautiful text I just read you says. We have the impression we're running our own lives, but in fact, it's part of this sacred design. And what I love in this text by Sandy Wilder, the philosophers, since the Greek philosophers, have been discussing about the issue of free will. Do we have free will or not? And nobody's ever found a satisfying reply. And this text has been my first satisfying reply to the question of free will. There is a sacred design, it is multidimensional, and it exists undisturbed while each of us still has his own free will on his own little individual path. And again, Apostle Paul says, for those for whom the Bible is a reference, and it's one of my favorite statements in the Bible, all things work together to the good of them that love God. Now, nobody knows what God is. I'll tell a little story about that in a minute. But I really think that absolutely everything that happens to us is for our good. That's why we can say, yes, thank you, to every single situation. Because behind the sometimes daunting or fearful appearances, there is another plan that is working for our good. I promised a little story about God. Okay? Many people try to define God. I've totally given up doing that. Although I have my own definition, but it's rather strange. I'll give it at the end of the story. For many years, I was on a spiritual path, which I believed was the ultimate in terms of truth. And we were taught this. The leaders, the founder of the movement claimed it was the ultimate spiritual path, the ultimate truth. And we had a textbook with a very clear definition of God. And for me, that was the ultimate truth. I didn't even question it. And I lived in Senegal for a good many years. For 5 years, I lived between two shanty towns. I mean, a couple of 100 yards from each other. And the young boys from the shanty town would sometimes come to my home near Saturday afternoons. We would drink Moroccan green tea together, which is a lovely custom and delicious tea. And one of the boys was the son of the local imam of one of the two shanty towns. And I thought, well, one Sunday afternoon, I thought, well, I'm going to ask Imam Sal how Islam defines God. I was so certain that I had the best definition you could ever have because it was in our textbook. So in the afternoon, I strode over on the beach. It was the shanty towns, my little bungalow were built on the beach. And with this absolute state of mind that I was going to teach him a lesson. And my state of mind was that of the wonderful Japanese proverb, which says, it's very difficult to describe the vast horizon of the ocean to the little frog at the bottom of his well. My mind was the bottom of that well. And I arrived at Imam Sal's little shack. It was just a shack out of wood, and the ground was sand, and he had his little prayer carpet on the sand. And after the usual greetings, I asked him, Imam Sal, how does Islam define God? And when he replied to me, the little frog in me just had the surprise of its life. He said, Pierre, if you took all the branches of all the trees of the planet and the water of all the oceans and rivers and lakes and streams and fountains of the world as ink, you could not write out all the names or the qualities of God. And in the moment of stunned silence that followed, he said, you know, Pierre, you are a better Muslim than most of the Muslims that surround me. By that he meant I did not drink. I did not run after girls, didn't even have a girlfriend, whereas most of the young European what one calls coopérants, people who've come to work in development programs, had carloads of young, attractive, beautiful Senegalese girls running after them with the hope of marrying them one day. And I gave generously, and Islam promotes tithing. As an American poet said, I've forgotten his name, he drew a circle that closed me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. Love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that closed him in. I had built a big wall around me, closing Imam Saad out of my heart. He had drawn a much larger circle that enclosed me in his tolerance and warmth and friendliness. I love that story. Now come back to my definition of God. So God cannot be defined. My present working definition of God is that it's the quantum space of infinite love where everything is immediately possible. That's my definition of God. The quantum space of infinite love where everything is immediately possible. Okay, Marek, are there any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, well, I don't really have a question. I just thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's inspirational.
Okay.
I just thank you. From the moment I tuned in, you asked me, "Hi, who are you and where are you from?" I mean, there were not that many people yet, but you made contact and something happened here.
Great.
So thank you.
Well, I thank you because without you, I wouldn't be communicating. You made me the greatest treasure gift in my life. I told you at the beginning, I told at least Marek that my greatest joy in life is communicating. So you've given me a huge joy. You've expressed to me that it's worthwhile continuing to communicate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I love you and I bless you.
thank you. I do too. And I see you as the beautiful child of God. You are now. Not when you've climbed the mountain a little more. Now. I have another story to tell about that, but we'll have to do that another time because I think the time is over, isn't it, Marek?
Officially, yeah, but we can keep going a bit longer if you want.
It's you decide, Marek. I'm at your orders. I'm your humble servant.
Yeah, please tell that story.
Oh, well, this is the second most powerful mystical experience I had in my life after the one on the airplane. I was in Geneva and I was between two jobs. I'd just come back to Geneva. I was going to start a job as a consultant for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And my little voice said, Pierre, you're going to take the whole day tomorrow to go and study spiritually. As I tried to be obedient, I said, okay. And I went down to town. There's a room in many cities in the West called Prison Saint Reading Room, where anybody of any denomination whatsoever or no denomination can go and study quietly without being disturbed. And so I went down the morning when it opened at 9 o'clock and sat at a table. And I asked the universe, what should I study? Why have you brought me here? And the reply came so clear immediately. Study the innocence of man. Man in the generic sense, of course, man and woman. And I spent the most glorious day reading texts, meditating, looking up concordances. And when I went home to my parents' home in the evening, I was just floating on clouds. And the next morning, I had an appointment with a friend who was a member of the spiritual group I belonged to at the time. And she'd had an extremely rigid Catholic upbringing, and sex was a major problem for her. She had grown-up children. She was about 40, and yet she told me every time she had sex with her husband, she felt guilty. Well, after 20 years, it's quite a burden, don't you think? So she said, I'd like to talk to you about this. So I went down to town the day after my study, and I was so full of this inspiration. And just before getting off the tram at the stop where I was to get off, the whole tram filled with a sort of energy and light, and I saw the absolute innocence, the ontological, essential innocence of every person in that tram. It was fabulous. And I got off. The same thing in the street, on the pavement. I felt like lifting my arms in the air and saying, you are innocent, you are innocent. But as I didn't want them to drag me to the insane asylum, I kept quiet and went to my appointment with this friend. And I must have been so filled with this vision of the innocence of man that in half an hour she was relieved of something very heavy. And that's the end of it. But the vision, like the experience on the plane, has never, of course, left. I do believe that behind the material appearances, every single one of us, from the worst criminals, presidents of multinationals who exploit the planet, or anybody listening to this show, is totally, completely innocent. That's why there's no condemnation. There's only condemnation in heavy old theological teachings, which we must brush away now. We're on a new energy level. The old teachings have been, to a certain extent, useful for a certain time, but all this guilt stuff must be definitively thrown away. We are innocent. Okay, Marek. I see all these strange figures and letters on the screen.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is unmute everybody, and there's one blessing, the one for Pierre, for developing infinite kindness towards myself.
Yes.
How about we read that together? I'll post it in the chat.
Are you posting it on the screen?
Yeah, give me a moment. So that's day 316.
Exactly.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so I'll unmute everybody.
And you want me then to read out loud, Marek?
Yeah, I thought let's read it together.
Okay, wonderful. Are we ready?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. I bless myself in my ability to express kindness.
We're all off.
What's this?
Doesn't work.
It doesn't really work, Pierre.
That was a nice idea.
I'll read it. Okay?
That was funny.
Shall I read it?
Yeah, you read it, Pierre.
Okay. I bless myself in my ability to express infinite kindness to the child of the universe I am. May I unhesitatingly express to myself the kindness I am so willing to extend to others. When I stumble or fall, may I grant myself a tender word of kindness rather than a harsh reprimand. When I procrastinate, play tricks with myself, or knowingly avoid a needed challenge, may I allow myself to become aware of the harm I'm doing myself rather than knocking myself around with angry words.
Lee, wat doe je?
When I'm struggle weary and feel like giving up the fight, may I allow myself a rest in your green pastures rather than hitting myself on the head or whipping myself along. And finally, may I always be aware of the barrier between the deceitful hammock of self-indulgence and the true wisdom of authentic kindness towards myself. Remembering your words spoken through a great spiritual seer. This is my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased. A statement that applies to every single one of us on the planet and other planets too. There we are.
Thanks, Pierre. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My joy. Thank you to all of you for your deep listening. I really felt it. The quality of your listening was awesome.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bless you all. Bye.
Thank you, Pierre.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank
Bye.
My
you.
joy. My joy.
Thank you.
Bye, Pierre. Talk soon.
Okay, Marek. Will you communicate with me tonight more or not?
I'll send you an email.
Okay, perfect. Lovely. So thank you, Marek. That was great. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Manuela.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All the best.